Madre John Madden sit in the doorway of my tiny house in Acapulco, Mexico, where they call me Juanito, Little John, or Johnny. I've been spending my morning consumed with love, consumed with memories of love. I started to create a document that I'd put in the description section of my YouTube videos of people who have influenced me seriously in my life. I made a video earlier today about Harvey Jackins, who's one of them. I'm up to about 10 or 12 who have Google or Wikipedia pages who are famous or semi-famous, and something like 30 who are not. It includes, at this point, virtually every woman who has been a lover of mine in my life, any guy who has sat in a men's group with me, anyone with whom I've had an authentic connection, and several dogs. Yeah. And J.D. Salinger, who wrote the book Franny and Zoe that I read in high school and introduced me to a character who called himself a reverse paranoid because he seriously believed that the world was conspiring to make him happy. And that's me. But I want to talk in particular about one of the people who's on that list who's not in Wikipedia or Google, Sister MaryEllen Moore, one of my therapists, a heroic therapist. I tell elsewhere how I spent 30 years of my life believing I had bipolar disorder and taking terrible drugs. Ruined. I kept trucking, kept learning, kept having experiences, but on the verge of suicide for 30 years. I think 15 hospitalizations, all of them for suicidal depression. And I made one attempt that was so serious that when they saw that in the file, they never doubted about locking me up. They'd bring me in. And I encountered MaryEllen Moore in Chicago when I was in that state. I was wildly suicidal, and a friend got me to her. She's a clinical psychologist, nun, head of her order of nuns also. Small order, south side of Chicago. Very Irish like me and a couple years older than me. On my second session with her, I said, you know, that contract, I'm an old therapist myself, that you always say, requiring the client saying, if you get serious about killing yourself, call me first. And I said, I'm not going to honor that. If I really want to kill myself, you think I'm going to call you? No, that's always a ridiculous request. Always. So I can't see you anymore because I won't keep it. And we talked for the hour, and at the end she said, well, let's make an appointment. I said, well, you're going to see me again? She says, what am I going to do, throw you out? No. So she was brave. She was seriously brave. And she went way outside of the confines of therapy in so many ways for me. She mostly did housekeeping with me. She mostly managed my life to try to keep me on the planet. We never went deep. I don't think she likes to work that way. I don't think she's really psychologically oriented herself. She just keeps trucking herself. She's a wild workaholic. But she worked with me for years. The longest I was ever in the hospital was 9 weeks at University of Illinois, Chicago Teaching Hospital. It was really corrupt as I think about it. They didn't take insurance. They never filed insurance. It was the drug manufacturers who financed them. And what they would do, they would take you off all the drugs you had been taking and put you in a clinical trial for something new. And the one thing they put me on was a terrible, terrible drug for antidepressant that kept me numb for a couple of years. Terrible. So I came out of those 9 weeks a wreck. Not suicidal at that point, but in tatters. And she always loved that I was a psychologist. She wasn't so crazy about this management consulting thing. That didn't make sense to her. She wanted me to be a psychologist again. So she left a message on my tape saying, I've got a gig for you as a psychologist. You are to be the therapist at a long-term women's shelter for homeless women. And Sister Sally Brennan runs the shelter on the south side of Chicago. and you would spend Saturday mornings seeing 3 clients every week, and at a pretty good rate. And she really didn't have any choice. I'm the head of her board. We're real close friends. She had to do it. And it was my first introduction really in depth to homeless people, which has been a big part of my life, including being homeless myself a lot. Yeah. She made 2 trips she and Sister Sally Brennan, who was one of 2 other people that she decided to make friends. So she went way outside the usual bounds there. 3 of us, me and Sister Sally and another nun who had been a therapy client, all became really good friends of hers. So she and Sister Sally came out to Asheville, North Carolina to see me twice. And on one of those occasions, they bought me a motor scooter. I was not off of cars because I had had an alcohol problem, but because I was broke. They got me a motor scooter. And that's pretty great here in Mexico, when my friend Marcos Chan says, "You sure you can operate these motor scooters can be dangerous?" It was only 10 years ago that I had a motor scooter. And then in Chicago, 3 years ago, when my first camper van had died quite suddenly, she got one of her donors to fork over $5,000 to get me a new camper van. Yeah, very old. And she came, and she's middle class. She is really middle class. And we would battle about that. When I was in Chicago, I spent a lot of days in a little cottage behind her big old, once upon a time mansion of famous people. I think it's a big drug company. No, it was the shoes, the inserts, Scholl. The Scholl, Dr. Scholl people had owned it. And I was in a little cottage out in back, and there was a dense undergrowth at the back part of the property, and I was peeing back there one day, which I like to do, having lived in the country a lot. And the automatic door next door opened up, and somebody drove out and caught me in the act. And when she called MaryEllen and complained, I said to MaryEllen, "You know, if at 30 yards that broad saw something that traumatized her for life, that was a hell of a compliment. I'm going to take that as a compliment." So that wasn't the response she wanted. And one of the other nuns, who was very domineering and really used to people doing what she said, wanted me to always scoop up after my little chihuahua over in the big park on the other side. And I said, "No. Number one, she's never on a leash. She's always in the grass where nobody walks anyway. And I'm not going to ruin my walk following around after her with a poop bag." That's pretty hysterical here in Acoma, where 80% of the dogs run free. And the deal is, you watch where you walk. Don't walk in dog shit. It's pretty obvious. So in Chicago, she bought me that camper van. And thank God she got a call from one of her clients and couldn't negotiate with the guy, because she was ready to haggle. And this guy had a broken life. His wife had left him 2 weeks before. He had bought the big camper van for a family of 5, and now it was just him and one of his kids. And he had just put a $5,500 engine in that thing. And he sold it to me for $5,000 because he needed money to get a car for his teenage daughter. She would have haggled. With him. And I said, "Man, I wish I could give you 10. I wish I could give you 10. He's turned out to be quite a cool guy on TikTok. He has a great TikTok channel. He's come into his own, I think. But MaryEllen, so after that, she was enough offended by my non-middle class ways that she said, "I'm buying you this car," and then nothing. And really nothing. She won't answer my messages. She is over me. But at a time when I needed her, she was perfect for me in her own wacky way.